Most people know Tallahassee's Tom Brown Park for its softball fields or for its new tennis complex. The prettiest part of the park, though, is just down the hill at the nature trail. We'll visit there today on Florida Naturally. Hi, I'm Carolee Boyle-Spragle. We're at Tom Brown Park, just east of Tallahassee, with Robert Brunger of the Big Bend group of the Sierra Club. Rob, I'm just amazed that there's this much green space so close to Tallahassee.
Yes, we're fortunate to have such a nice park in our area. This is about a 20-25 minute bicycle ride from downtown Tallahassee, so it's not all that far. It's 5.0 miles from the corner of Park and Monroe. And if you want to come out Park Avenue on your bicycle, you can make it. This is a 250 some odd acre park. It was acquired in 1972 by means of a donation, and it's run jointly by the county and the city. And it's large enough so that it has several distinctive kinds of usage areas. For instance, on the west side of the road, I think most people are familiar with the rather extensive baseball diamond stretch up there. There's also a number of recently built tennis courts. There are two picnic areas. We're standing in the larger and older main picnic area right now. Behind me is the boardwalk across this pond, and there's a field off to the north. There's also a stream that meanders down through the woodland and comes out over by the railroad tracks at the corner of the park, and we'll look at some of those areas here this morning. I guess we can just start by going down the boardwalk, and I'll tell you a little bit about the pond. Of course, this is a very scenic kind of area of the pond. It is a dammed pond, and there's not much water flow through it, so it tends to be kind of a stagnant system on occasion. Nonetheless, we do get a lot of bird life through here and a lot of wildlife. About 2 years ago, I saw, much to my great astonishment, an alligator out in the pond, and I would be very surprised to see another one, and I'm not sure how that first one ever got here to begin with. One of the nice things about a park of this nature is that you don't have to go too far to find wildlife sometimes. For instance, we have a signature spider here, also called a silk spider. This is one of the more commonly seen kinds of spiders in our area simply because they're good sized and they weave such a fancy and elaborate web. It's quite an attractive web hunter spider here. You probably know that not all spiders spin webs. A number of them are hunting insects, predators, excuse me, not insects, arachnids. But the ones that are probably best known are the ones that do spin webs. We also have butterflies in this area. We have a viceroy butterfly here. Viceroys are mimics of a butterfly called the monarch butterfly, which will get together in very large flocks in the fall and go on these very extensive migrations coming all the way down from Canada. Then they have to fly across the Gulf of Mexico. They spend the winter in Mexico and then come back in the spring. It's really quite dramatic, for instance, in the fall to see them gathered up in huge flocks just before they're taken off across the Gulf. Right above the spider that we've been looking at is a plant that's very typically found in these low marshy areas. Just break off a little sprig of it here for you. Let you smell it.
Oh, that's nice.
Yeah. This is called wax myrtle, sometimes also known as bayberry. The tiny little berries that it puts forth have been used by the Indians and the pioneers to make a wax out of them. From that wax, they make bayberry candles, and they're very fragrant. But they're very tedious to make, and that's why in the places where you can find them, they tend to be rather expensive. The other typical plant that we have along here, these little trees, are willows. Of course, willows like wetlands areas, and they're very typical here. We have a little turtle down there.
Oh, that is so little.
Not surprisingly, we've got a here in this pond. I believe that particular one is called a yellow-bellied turtle. There's also Florida cooters, as they're known. They sometimes get to be about this big, that are found in the pond here. Sometimes, particularly when the cooler weather, you'll find several of them lined up on a log all at once. They're a bit skittish, though. They tend to jump off before you can get too close. This white flowering stuff that we see is growing rather profusely, covering up the willows. This is worth talking about. This is called climbing hempweed, and it presents a very copious food source for all these butterflies that we're seeing around here.
Yeah, the insects really seem to enjoy it.
Yes, there's also wasps, and we've seen some bees and a number of other things in here. Several different kinds of caterpillars may call this area home. Over here, you can see a Carolina annual lizard going up and down a tree, probably in pursuit of some of these insects that are in pursuit of the flowers.
Is that annual something? That one's green, but I've seen some brown ones. Is it the same species or is it something else?
Yeah, Carolina annuals are the lizard that most people mistakenly call a chameleon. They're very common. They're found in people's gardens and out your back walkway. They're very good to have around, actually. They eat a lot of insects, mosquitoes and small bugs and so forth. People call them chameleons because they do have some color-changing ability. For instance, just this morning I've seen some brown ones on the boardwalk and green ones in the tree, and it's actually the same animal. This is a really nice specimen we got down here.
Oh, isn't he pretty?
This particular kind of caterpillar will inject a little venom into you. In fact, if we take this leaf, and if we poke him in the middle, he just might react. This is a defense strategy against predators, anything that might want to eat this caterpillar. You can see these little horns reaching up that will sting you.
Oh, look at him fold up.
Kind of an ugly-looking creature.
Oh, I think he's real pretty. Bright green.
Well, it depends on how close you are.
I guess so. Kind of like snakes. They're nice at a distance.
I just noticed here at my feet.
Oh, look at that.
How about that? This is a dragonfly. It's dead, of course, or I wouldn't be able to pick him up. Dragonflies, of course, are very common around here, and you'll see them swooping across the pond most months of the year. You can see the different parts of an insect. Here's a pretty good example of it. Insects typically have a head and an abdomen and a thorax. So they have, and of course this long tail in this case, because it also has wings. It's a flying insect. And insects have 3 pairs of legs, 6 legs altogether, which, by the way, one of the distinguishing things from insects and spiders. Spiders have 2 body parts and 8 legs. This, I believe this one is a male. Down at the very bottom of his tail, you can see this, well, let's see if I can separate this. He's got these 2 little clasping devices here so that he can fly connected with the female when they're mating. That's a real nice specimen.
Really
We'll just
is.
leave him here for some collector to come along. Further down this boardwalk here, I'd like to show you another couple of plant types that we can find in here. Oh, praying mantis. We were talking about how insects are predatory arachnids. This is a predatory insect. This is very typical of him. He's got these very highly evolved forelegs. He just may reach out and grab me if I'm not careful here. These forelegs are developed into a pincer kind of movement, so he can grab hold of some kind of little bug or something and have them for supper. Again, this is a good example. This is, of course, a good time of year for insects, and there's any number of them floating around and flying around and just being here in this kind of swampy, marshy, wetlands type of area. I was going to show you a couple more of the plants that we can find here typically. This one, you can see, you know, I'm pulling down the fruited part of the plant, and it probably looks a whole lot like your kind of typical string bean that you'll get in your garden. Well, that's a dead giveaway as to what family it's in. It's the legume family. One of the things that characterizes the soil of North Florida is that it tends to be rather poor in nitrogen. So one of the strategies that plants have evolved in the legume family, they have nitrogen-fixing bacteria that are connected to the roots of the plant. And in the roots also are some little nodules, which if you went to all the trouble to get down there in the muck and you dug up the roots, the little nodules, you could break them off and fry them or bake them, and they're called groundnuts, and that's the name of this particular plant. It's called groundnut. I was looking around earlier for some flowers. Some of them are still in bloom over here. I don't know how well you can see them in there. They tend to grow in rather thick clusters of a sort of a
typical
pinkish. Yes, a typical pea blossom. I'm hoping we'll find some more legume flowers later on. We'll have a look at them and show you what distinguishes them, makes them what they are. Another kind of very typical plant that we have here, it grows quite copiously in this area, is elderberry. You can tell an elderberry right away. It's got these compound leaf structures that are opposite, and that's a little bit uncommon to have that kind of leaf structure. They're usually found in kind of a damp environment like we have here around the pond at Tom Brown Park. And they produce blossoms in the spring, very pretty, fragrant white blossoms that you can make a light batter, and you dip the head of blossoms in the batter and you can fry it and eat it. And some people come out here occasionally and pick them for that purpose.
I think you could eat the berries.
Yeah, they're more commonly known. I've got a stalk of the berries here. These berries are sometimes used as a dye. More often people can squeeze up the juice and make jam out of them, or wine or things like that. It's a bit of a trouble, but they're tasty for all that.
I made my first elderberry jelly this year, and it was a nuisance.
Would you do it again?
I don't know.
Well, anyway, that just goes to show you that there are foods, wild foods just growing, not far away. And if you know what to look for and how to fix them and care to go to the trouble to utilize them, they're good for something. One of the things that you can hear in the background here, I'm not sure how well it's picking up, but there's kind of a continuous noise up here, and you get so used to it you don't even think about it. And that's made by insects. And this is the insect in question. It's called a cicada. This one, again, is another dead specimen we happen to find here. And again, you can see all the body parts. Some people might think this guy looks a little like a cockroach, but he's got some unique features of his own. Mostly they just produce this omnipresent noise in North Florida's woods during the summer.
That's a really big one. I've seen smaller ones, but that's...
They certainly are good size. When they're alive, they have a little more of a color sheen than this. They have a kind of a blue-greenish kind of color. Well, I guess we'll just leave this for whoever's going to come along and pick up our insects.
A lot of elderberries still along.
Over here are a few trees that I thought might be of some interest. It's as good a place as any to talk about some of the trees that you can find here in the park and, of course, in the greater North Florida area as well. This one that we're coming up to here right now with a kind of bluish-grayish bark is called a chinaberry tree. Chinaberry is not a native tree, but it is widely planted as an ornamental because it makes a very nice shade tree. It has this real bushy leaf kind of thing. One of the things that's unusual about a chinaberry is this enormous leaf. The leaf attaches to the stem, and then this whole thing right here that I'm holding in my hand is one leaf. It's technically called a bipinnately compound leaf. This, for instance, is a single leaflet of the leaf, and a subunit of that. The berries are poisonous to animals, so there are some drawbacks to using this as a shade tree. This tree right here is one of my favorites in this area. This is a black walnut. Black walnuts don't grow very plentifully down here. They're much commoner further north, of course. And again, you have your concept of the compound leaf here. Let's see if I get a nice one. There's one leaf making its attachment on the branch, and then all of these This, for instance, is not a leaf, it's a leaflet, technically. It's all part of one leaf unit. And up in the tree there, you'll see some of the nuts forming. They're big green nuts. And here's one that's fallen down. I'm going to try to peel it apart here and see if we can get down to the nut part of it a little bit. The nut itself is actually surrounded by this thick, and as you can see, it's somewhat juicy rind, which is making a very serious stain on my fingers. Once I get this rather messy and oily and very full of stain kind of husk off, on the inside is a nut, which is very, very hard. You'd have to have a hammer or something to really bang it out. And there's not a whole lot of meat in there once you go to all that trouble, but it's pretty good. And for people who are really into natural foods, this is, something you can do. Is
Makes great ice cream.
Makes great ice cream. Let me see if I can get some of the stain off my hands here. I'm afraid that'll be with me for weeks. Hey, what have we here?
Oh, look at this guy.
Oh, he's making a little migration across the grass. We've got a...
Oh!
Watch him, he may try to snap at you here. Well, this is one of those turtles we were looking at earlier. This is, I believe it's called a yellow-bellied turtle, which is a subspecies of something else. He's
look at
trying
that
to get at me.
mouth.
And I think he was making his way down to the water. I'm not quite sure what he was doing out of the water. But we'll just let him go down there.
He's really got toenails on him, doesn't he?
Turtles are very efficient animals, and they need to have been. They've been around for hundreds of millions of years, and they look a little ungainly, and they're, of course, no big speed demons on land, but they put them in water and kind of watch them go. They'll disappear quicker than it'll take to tell about it. And they probably eat little fish and bugs swimming on the surface of the water and so forth. Well, I think we'll just put him in the water and let him disappear. Ow! Here you go, fella. Go for it. No! He's attacking me now. Come on. There you go. Water.
Boy.
As you can see, he disappeared almost as quick as I put him in the water. One of the other trees I was going to talk about in this area is this one right here. You can see it's got a couple of initials on it, and the initials weren't carved like this. The tree kind of grew out from where the initial carving was. That's the peculiarity of this rather warty kind of bark. This is called a sugar hackberry. And they have these very, very twiggy, kind of sharp-pointed branches. There's a number of hackberries in Tom Brown Park. It's not a particularly common tree, but we happen to have several specimens here in this area. One more tree, possibly of some interest, this one right here. This is the, I believe, the male tree for a persimmon. It has a kind of a glossy leaf, which is in an alternate structure here. And persimmons, of course, make very good eating if you get them when they're ripe. If you've ever eaten one that wasn't ripe, you know what I'm talking about.
Really?
There are male and female persimmon trees, and like I say, this is the male tree, so there wouldn't be any fruit on it. And I'm sure there are some female trees probably somewhere nearby. Of course, there's a magnolia behind us. I believe everybody's familiar with the magnolia. I had gathered up some leaves of some specimens of a few other trees that are commonly found in this area. Here's one that I think a lot of people are familiar with. It's very star-shaped kind of look, and that is sweet gum, very common. Frequently, I found this one around the border of the pond. Here's another one that was found around the border of the pond. It's also found in the upland areas around everywhere around Tom Brown Park. There's quite a number of this. This is a wild black cherry. And the birds love this particular tree. When the fruit is in season, you'll find big flocks of birds like cedar waxwings and some other species like that. It too has a very distinctive bark. It doesn't show up very well in this twig, but the tree has a distinctive bark.
Is it edible by humans?
Yes and no. You can eat it, but it isn't very tasty. They're also very tiny for the tiny little amount of fruit you get out of it. Here's a better look at the hackberry that I was just talking about. Notice that, if you can see this, that the has a kind of an imbalance on the way that where the leaf meets the branch. It's always just a little larger on one side than the other. That's a distinctive feature of that particular kind of leaf. This is one of those willows. I just wanted to point out that the very narrow leaf structure that characterizes willows. Also very flexible whip-like branches. All willows are like that. Here's one other one, a typical, we didn't see this when we were walking around, but this is a button bush, excuse me. And you can see by these little knobby fruit structures in the end of the branch where it gets the name button. This is a very close relative of partridge berry. If you have partridge berry grown as ground cover anywhere near where you live, this is a same family
as tiny as that little thing is.
Yeah. You'll notice that the leaf structure is very similar. It has, again, these are your opposite leaves, or one opposite the other on the other side of the stem. Very symmetrical, very pretty kind of bush, frequently found in wetland areas. And now, there's a couple things I wanted to look over here. This will get us into the meadow area of Tom Brown Park, and I think we'll probably find a number of wildflowers and perhaps some other things over there. So if we'll just head off in that direction and pass by here. Carol Lee, a couple of years ago I had an interesting opportunity right in this area where we are right now to do a little bit of a study on a couple of birds' nests. I had a brown thrasher that was making its nest right in this wax myrtle bush, and right across down here by the water I had a red-winged blackbird, two red-winged blackbirds in fact, just in this general area that were setting up nests. Now both of these things are practically, literally within reach of this path that we're standing on, and yet both of those birds brought up their broods right there in the middle of all these people coming back and forth here in the park.
And probably most of them who came by didn't even see them.
Probably most of them didn't. Probably not. The only reason I noticed them is because I was out here looking for them. Bird watching, of course, is one of those diseases. They say that bird watching is an incurable disease, and the only thing that'll remedy it is to get up at 4 in the morning and slog through a swamp. And those of us who've got the bug will attest to the fact that that's true. This area over here is kind of a special area to me, down here by the other side of the pond from where we started off on. This is where I was married. 8 o'clock on a Saturday morning last October, my wife and I and about 100 well-wishers gathered out here right in this general area, and had a minister from her church, minister from my church, and we had a very nice service right here, and we invited all our wedding guests to bring their binoculars and join in the festivities. It was a good show, and I'd do it again. I think this is as good a place as any for us to cut off across the meadow and see if we can see some of the fall wildflowers in the meadow over here. I wanted to come over here and show you some of the things in this meadow area. There was a little small thicket of flowers over here. Here's one right here. This we were talking earlier about legumes and how they put nitrogen in the soil. And like I say, this is old farmland. This is a kind of legume called cassia, and you'll find there's 2 or 3 different species of cassia growing around this area. So this is yet another kind of legume, and I'll show you 2 or 3 more, I think, before we're done.
I am curious about one thing.
What's that?
And that's where the name of the park came from.
Right. Well, Tom Brown was a former county commissioner who gave several years of service to the county. He was particularly interested in recreational problems and worked hard on that. So in honor of his service to the county commissioners named it Tom Brown Park.
Oh, look at
Here's
this.
an especially nice little flower. This is called false foxglove. A very pretty purplish color growing over here in the shade. There's some other things here too. Here's a goldenrod, which is on its way. Goldenrod, of course, hasn't quite flowered out yet, but it's coming. It's one of the fall wildflowers, and of course we'll have a lot of that on the meadow. If we head back over this way, I think we'll see some more. Yes, we've got some, here's another kind of a legume. Insects seem to like these, and I'm sorry, I don't know what this is, and it's kind of embarrassing to say that it's one of those kind of a nature study is in general kind of a study of miniatures anyway, and here you've got this especially nice white and purple flower. Here's a plant. This is a small sample of it, and let me see, there must be one around here somewhere. Yes, here's one over here. Farmers are not at all fond of this one. This is called crotalaria. Again, this is another legume. Special problems with the crotalaria is that when cattle eat it, they tend to get sick. This is not in full bloom here, but it's got a big yellow showy flower and can get pretty good sized. Farmers have real problems with this, like I say, because they like to eliminate it from their pastures. While I'm standing here, here's a member of the mint family. This is called the blue curl. Oh dear, that particular blossom just fell off. And I don't see any others that are in bloom in this bright sunlight here.
Not especially fragrant.
No mint smell? One of the, I have walnut all over my hands, I can't smell anything. One of the things about mint family in general is that you have this opposite leaf structure and a kind of a square stem. I don't know how well that shows up as square or not, but it
feels square.
Particularly distinctive feature of the members of the mint family.
Well, Rob, I sure do appreciate you taking us around today. We've certainly seen an awful lot of things in a very small space, and I'm just delighted to know there's something like this close to Tallahassee that residents can just come out anytime and enjoy.
Yes. Well, I'm pleased that the park is here for people to enjoy, and like I say, where we are right now is but the frontier. It goes on from here. There is a whole area, for instance, way on the other side of the park where bluebirds live.
Oh.
And then there's the area down in the bottomland area where the stream that makes this pond feeds down and joins eventually into Lake Lafayette. And that's a whole kind of wetlands area in itself of some interest. So yes, there's a lot here, and I'm glad that we have it, and I hope people can learn to come out and enjoy it as much as I have.
Well, I see something blooming back there that I don't know, and I want to walk around and see it.